briefly, my name is Jason Scott. I am partner and co-chair of the Artificial Intelligence Practice Group for Gordon Reed Scully Mansacotti. We are the only law firm that has an actual physical office in all 50 states. So it's been a blessing to have that role, and it's been a blessing to be a part of this. So, a couple of things that struck me from the last segment that really stuck out. Both Jennifer and Jess highlighted the fact that AI really is not new. And it was interesting just to hear that, and I'm aware of that, but it was interesting just that that highlighted because it kind of begs the question almost, well, what's happened recently? Because here we are talking about all these things. There's tons of legislation out there. There's or proposed legislation, I should say. And we're seeing this world change very rapidly, along with the technology that's changing very rapidly. So it kind of begs the question, well, what's different now? And I think honestly, the answer to that is ChatGPT becoming public in 2022 really was a wake-up call to the world about this kind of new generative AI, large language models, machine learning that's really very powerful in a very different way than maybe older predictive models that have been used for decades, actually. While everyone was talking, I just did a quick search just to get some up-to-date numbers. And we currently have in the United States over 1,500 state bills and 150 federal bills currently in proposal. So that is a lot. So clearly it is on the radar of legislative bodies with regard to regulating some type of AI. Healthcare is super highly regulated industry, and that's not going to change. And we already see very targeted legislation on the insurance side in particular, claims denials, things like that. So it's here, and we really need to talk about it. So as we bridge from clinical questions and clinical discussions to kind of safety, ethics, and responsibility, the question no longer is, does AI work or what does it do? But who governs it and who owns it? And as Sarah pointed out, I couldn't agree more. If you're creating something, you need to have be compensated for it for sure, because our world is rapidly changing, and the people on this call are in that role of creating these products and creating this development, and that's very exciting. So it begs the question, who is responsible when it goes wrong? Um, it's really something that has to start being addressed. Hospitals and healthcare systems are contracting now with AI vendors, and I would argue that not always understanding some of the obligations and risks uh, in that transaction process. So I would suggest to everyone that governance starts at even at the procurement stage, as we're taking in and starting to deploy certain software and models for use. Um, and not understanding that bias in data sets isn't just an ethical problem, it's becoming a regulatory and liability exposure. So with that, I want to turn the conversation as we shift not only for what AI can do, but how we ensure it's implemented safely, ethically, and responsibly. And I'm going to be turning the conversation for this first part to Corey, Rasha, Jennifer, Thalia, and Lori. And Corey, I'd like to start with you if I can. How do current regulatory pathways attempt to address bias in clinical AI systems?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about this earlier, but from this large multi-center clinical trial we just finished wrapping up, one of the biggest regulatory priorities was ensuring the model performs consistently and safely across different patient populations and clinical environments. That's really what the FDA cared about. These regulatory frameworks attempt to address bias by emphasizing diverse and representative training and validation data sets in the real world clinical setting. But the issue is that even within multi center trials, achieving truly representative data sets remains challenging. you can imagine from an equity standpoint, the type of people getting care at MD Anderson or Mayo Clinic or MSK already live in a system in which they benefit from healthcare. So if you have a system that's benefiting patients that have the ability to access healthcare, then when we're training and validating an AI algorithm on the system that already has pitfalls built into the system itself, then we can run into some issues. And that's why validation cannot just be a technical exercise. It really requires clinical continuous evaluation in real world practice. And I actually read a blog from Jennifer this week that talked about, holding people accountable at a leadership hospital setting and who's responsible for that and why. And, I also saw a question in the chat that's, as we continue to introduce these AIs and we're freeing up time for nurses and clinical staff members, are we really closing the equity gap? Because we're just introducing more patients who already benefit from the society that we live in and continuing to disproportionately affect people who are marginalized by introducing AI. And that's a huge topic that we should all be talking about today as AI is brought into the clinical setting. Are we really doing what we're intended to do and why?
Mm.
Um, I think that those are big questions that leadership at hospitals need to be held accountable for. So,
I think that's great. And since you mentioned Jennifer, Jennifer, I'll ask you, from a global perspective, how do resource-limited healthcare systems approach equity differently?
I think it's stepping back as these models are being rolled into your settings, like asking those questions, like how is this model trained? Which I go back to, like you're bringing a model that was in New York into an area that nothing, like it looks nothing like the patient population. For example, a dermatology tool that is trained on a specific data set, and you take it to a different global area, the tool is not going to perform the same. So technically, it's working, right? It works. This is where I always, as an informaticist, I run across with the engineers where they're like, the tool works. I'm like, but does it work for the right people, right? Who is this solving for? So from a global perspective, with the limited resources, is really being active participants, being in the table when these decisions are made, willing to really continue to train these models, like questioning it. If you get a decision that's not right, really asking why, like who are we able to go back to the vendor and retrain this model? Are we able to continuously allow, right? Like holding
Hmm.
the vendors accountable,
Hmm.
really having that in your contract. I always talk about this, like as you're signing those contracts with these vendors, they need to be partnerships. It's no longer you give us a system, we implement it, and you just keep patching it month to month, whatever changes you're going to make. We need to know what changes are you making, who is it impacting, especially because these are data sets. What data sets are you introducing into our models? I think I wrote an article about your EHR is now the new invisible AI tool that you're not aware of, right? You didn't sign an AI contract, but all of a sudden AI is making decisions for you. Are you aware of that? Really having those vendor partnerships will be critical. And from a global perspective, given our limited resources in some global areas, these people have, like when you have limited resources, you become very innovative, right? You get to know how to reallocate resources. So it's those community workers who are using mobile devices, how, really using the resources you have, training the people on it, making sure they're curious of why, now that this tool is giving me this answer, why is it giving me this answer? And then when you're giving people these mobile tools, will they even work? Is there data, right?
Yeah.
Is it Wi-Fi? Are they solar? Whatever. Look at whatever area you're going into. Ask the people who are actually going to use the tool how it will work for them. Even in the hospital, right? Instead of just introducing AI to the clinicians, ask them, what problems are you having? How can we implement whatever tool it is that to solve for your actual problem versus what we perceive to be the problem based on data? Because a lot of tools are like they'll run KPI reports, so they'll do all this data analysis, and they're like, I think we know what they need. No, ask the nurse. Ask the nurse in Kenya, because I'm from Kenya. So they're from the actual people who need it. What do they actually need, and what problem do they need the tool to solve for them? And do they have the resources for it as well?
Sure, and this is like a data science question, I guess, but even just balancing your data sets as something as simple and really elementary as that. But if I'm in New York and, my access to healthcare, I can go down the street quite literally, right? But in many parts of the United States, it's a multi-hour drive. And if you're building a model that's pulling data from certain parts of the country, just focusing on the US for a second, you know, I've got 8 million people just in the five boroughs, not alone the state compared to maybe, I don't know, South Dakota, where you might have a many-hour drive to receive specialized care. How does that impact the model? How does that impact your data set and then ultimately the outputs that you're using? I would suggest it does have an impact because there's might be lacking certain robustness to some of that data. And again, you have to balance for that.
Yeah. And when you think about it, so the decisioner will say, maybe it'll say, call, I don't know, the code team, or call, I don't know what team, or send them to the neurologist. You're like, we don't even have a neurologist in town. So you've given me a suggestion that I cannot even action on, right? So really looking at your population and those decisions that are made, even if it says that, the human, like you cannot penalize me because I didn't do the neurology assessment because I don't have one, or it will take 6 months
Mm.
out. So what is the other option, right?